The auction ring smelled of dust and old hay, and the men inside it smelled of money they had never earned honestly. Abigail Reyes stood at the edge of the crowd in a faded blue dress, holding a rope tied to the only cow she had left in the world. Nobody looked at her. Nobody spoke to her. When the auctioneer called her lot number, a ripple of laughter moved through the men near the front rail, low and cruel, the kind of laughter that did not need words to hurt. She had driven 11 miles before sunrise to get here. She had not eaten since the day before. Her husband had been dead for 140 days, and in that time she had learned that grief does not knock politely. It kicks the door down and moves in. The bidding opened low, insultingly low. A man near the front, Harlan Voss, called out a number that would not cover a week of feed, and two of his friends laughed and nodded, like he had said something clever. Abby felt her face go hot. She kept her chin up, because her husband, Daniel, used to say that Reyes never let anyone see her hands shake, even when they were shaking. The auctioneer's gavel rose. Nobody else raised a hand. The price was about to fall, and with it, everything she had left. Then a voice came from the back of the barn, calm and even, cutting through the noise like a knife through warm butter. "I'll pay triple that." Every head turned. A tall man in a worn leather jacket stepped out of the shadows near the loading doors, his boots kicking up dust with each slow step. Nobody in that town had seen him before. He did not smile. He did not explain himself. He simply looked at Abby, the way a person looks at someone they have already decided to protect, and in that one look, the entire balance of power in that barn shifted. Subscribe to see how this unfolds, and comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story is going. Abigail Reyes had learned, in the last 5 months, that a small town could be the loneliest place on earth. She stood near the rail of the Caldwell County auction barn with her cow, Marigold, breathing slow and steady beside her, and she counted the faces she recognized. She knew almost all of them. None of them looked back. Her husband, Daniel, had built the Reyes Ranch from nothing but a broken-down barn and a stubborn dream. He used to say the land did not care who owned it, only who was willing to work it. He had worked it for 11 years, through drought and flood and 2 bad winters, and then a truck had slid off Route 9 during an ice storm and taken him from her in one afternoon. Since then, Abby had run 400 acres alone, with the help of 2 hired hands who stayed more out of loyalty than wages, and a growing stack of unpaid bills that sat on her kitchen table like a second mortgage on her sanity. The bank had given her 90 days to bring her loan current. She had 81 left. Marigold was the last of her breeding stock worth real money, a heifer with clean lines and good blood, the kind of animal that should have drawn serious bids from serious buyers. Abby had brushed her that morning until her coat gleamed, hoping that if the animal looked cared for, someone might remember that the woman holding the rope deserved the same courtesy. She should have known better. The auctioneer, a wiry man named Pete Dunlap, called her lot number without much enthusiasm, and the murmur that ran through the crowd was not admiration. It was an amusement. Harlan Voss stood near the front rail, with his arms crossed over a shirt too clean for a working ranch, flanked by 2 men who laughed whenever he did, whether or not there was anything funny. "Widow Reyes is selling again," Harlan said, loud enough for half the barn to hear. "Somebody ought to tell her that ranching is a man's business." A few chuckles answered him. Abby kept her eyes forward. She thought of Daniel's voice, low and certain, telling her that Reyes never let anyone see her hands shake. She pressed her palm flat against her thigh to keep it still. The bidding opened at a number so low it barely covered the cost of Marigold's feed for a season, let alone her worth as a breeding animal. Harlan called it out himself, grinning, and 2 of his friends nodded along like he had made a fair offer. Nobody else raised a hand. The silence in the barn was its own kind of cruelty, the kind that did not need a single unkind word to land. Abby's chest ached, but she kept her spine straight. She thought about the bank statement in her coat pocket, the number circled in red ink, and the 81 days she had left to find a way to keep her home. The gavel rose in Pete Dunlap's hand. "Going once," he said. Nobody moved. "Going twice." Abby closed her eyes for half a second, bracing for the sound that would seal her fate. Then a voice came from the back of the barn, low and unhurried, carrying easily over the murmuring crowd. "I'll pay triple that." Every head in the building turned at once. A man stepped out from the shadow of the loading doors, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a worn leather jacket and dusty boots that had clearly walked more miles of open range than pavement. Abby had never seen him before in her life. His jaw was set, his grey eyes steady, and when he looked at her, there was something in his expression that she could not name. It was not a pity. It was closer to recognition, as if he already knew her story and had simply been waiting for the right moment to step into it. "Do I hear an objection?" Pete Dunlap asked, glancing nervously between Harlan and the stranger. Harlan's jaw tightened. "Who in the world are you?" "Name's Colt Bennett," the stranger said, "and I'm not asking permission. I'm making a bid." Pete Dunlap, clearly relieved to have an excuse to move the sale along, brought the gavel down. "Sold to the gentleman in the back, for triple the opening bid." A ripple of confused murmurs spread through the barn. Abby stood frozen, her hand still wrapped around Marigold's lead rope, watching this stranger walk toward her with the calm confidence of a man who had never once doubted himself in his life. "You didn't have to do that," she said when he reached her, her voice quieter than she intended. "I know," Colt said. "I wanted to." Up close, she could see the lines of hard work on his hands and the faint scar above his left eyebrow, the kind of mark that came from a life spent outdoors, not behind a desk. There was something familiar about him that she could not place, a feeling like she had heard his name before, in a conversation she could no longer fully remember. "You're not from Caldwell County," she said. "No, ma'am, I'm not." "Then why show up at a small ranch auction and pay 3 times market value for a cow you've never seen work a day in its life?" A faint, almost private smile crossed his face. "Because some things are worth more than the price on the tag." Behind them, Harlan Voss watched with narrowed eyes, already turning to whisper something to the men beside him. Abby did not need to hear the words to know that Harlan Voss did not like being outbid, and men like Harlan Voss did not forget embarrassment easily. She felt a small twist of unease settle into her stomach, but it was crowded out by something else, something she had not felt in 140 days, the faint, fragile shape of hope. Colt Bennett paid the clerk in full, cash, without blinking, and led Marigold toward a trailer parked at the edge of the lot. Abby followed, half out of curiosity, and half because she did not know what else to do with herself. "What happens to her now?" Abby asked, nodding toward Marigold. "She goes wherever you want her to go," Colt said. "I didn't buy her to keep her. I bought her so those men in there would remember that humiliating a woman in public has a cost." Abby studied him for a long moment, trying to read the truth behind his calm grey eyes. "You're a strange kind of stranger, Mr. Bennett. So I've been told." He handed her Marigold's lead rope back, along with a folded receipt that showed the sale, paid in full, in her name. "I'll be around the county for a while. Figured it was time somebody was." He touched the brim of his hat and walked away before she could ask what that meant, leaving her standing in the gravel lot with her cow, her unpaid bills, and a feeling she had not allowed herself in months. The sense that maybe, just maybe, she was not as alone in this fight as she had believed. She drove home slower than usual that evening, taking the long way past the fields Daniel had once told her would someday be worth more than either of them could imagine. The corn on the neighboring property stood tall and gold in the fading light, a reminder of the kind of harvest her own land might someday produce if she could just hold on long enough to see it through. She thought about the way the men in that barn had laughed, the way their laughter had felt like small stones thrown at her back, each one landing somewhere she could not quite protect. She had grown almost used to it over the past 5 months. Grief made a person a target in ways nobody warned you about. People assumed sorrow made a woman soft, breakable, easy to push aside, and Abby had spent 5 months proving, quietly and without an audience, that sorrow could just as easily make a person harder than stone. At home, she found Bonnie Alvarez waiting on the porch, a thermos of coffee balanced on her knee, and worry written plainly across her young face. Bonnie had been with the ranch for 2 years, ever since her own family's small plot had gone under during a bad drought season, and she had a way of watching Abby that reminded her uncomfortably of watching herself. "Levi told me what happened at the auction," Bonnie said, standing as Abby climbed the porch steps. "Some stranger bought Marigold for triple the price." That's the short version. Abby sank into the porch swing, suddenly aware of just how tired her bones felt. The long version is a lot stranger. "You think he's trouble?" Abby considered the question honestly before answering. "I think he's a mystery. Those aren't always the same thing, but they're close enough cousins that I mean to be careful." Bonnie poured coffee into the thermos cap and handed it over without being asked, a small kindness that meant more to Abby than the young woman likely realized. "Whatever happens, you know Levi and I aren't going anywhere. This ranch is the only home either of us has left to." The words settled warm in Abby's chest, chasing away some of the chill that had followed her home from the auction barn. She thought of Daniel again, of the way he used to say that a ranch was never really about the land at all, but about the people who chose to stay and work it side by side, through seasons good and bad. Looking out at Bonnie's steady, loyal face in the porch light, Abby began, for the first time in a long while, to believe he might have been right. That night, after Bonnie had gone home to her own small apartment above the feed store, Abby sat alone at the kitchen table with the receipt Colt had given her, running her thumb over the ink of his signature. Colt Bennett. The name meant nothing to her, and yet something about the shape of it felt oddly familiar, like a word on the tip of her tongue that refused to surface. She told herself it was exhaustion playing tricks on her mind, and went to bed without an answer, though the question followed her into her dreams regardless. News in Caldwell County traveled faster than the weather. By the time Abby pulled her truck into her own driveway that evening, her phone had already buzzed 3 times, with messages from neighbors asking who the stranger was and why he had thrown away good money on a widow's cow. She did not answer any of them. Instead, she sat on her porch steps as the sun dropped behind the tree line, turning the sky the color of a healing bruise, and she thought about Colt Bennett's eyes. There had been something behind them, some private weight he carried the way she carried her own, and she found herself wondering what exactly a man like that was doing in a town like this. Her ranch hand, Levi Thatcher, found her there a few minutes later, wiping grease from his hands with an old rag. Levi had worked for Daniel since before Abby had even met him, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s, with more patience than most people twice his age. "The whole town's talking about your auction," Levi said, easing himself down onto the step beside her. "I figured they would be. Man drops that kind of money on a heifer, people start asking questions." Levi glanced at her sideways. "You know him. Never seen him before in my life." "Well," Levi scratched at his jaw. "He asked around about renting the old Miller place down the road. Word is, he's planning on staying a while." Abby frowned, turning that information over. A man who paid triple market value for a stranger's cow and then quietly rented a house down the road was not behaving like someone passing through. He was behaving like someone with a plan, and Abby had learned the hard way that men with quiet plans in Caldwell County usually had reasons they did not share out loud. 2 days later, Colt Bennett appeared at her gate. He came on foot, leading a borrowed horse, dressed in the same worn jacket, his hat tilted low against the afternoon sun. Abby met him at the fence line, arms crossed, more guarded now than she had been in the auction barn. "You didn't come here for another cow," she said. "No, ma'am." He rested a forearm on the top rail of the fence. "I came to talk business." "I don't have money for business, Mr. Bennett, in case triple market value on a single heifer didn't make that obvious." "That's exactly why I'm here." He held her gaze steady. I want to offer you a partnership, capital to cover your loan payments, help with labor, access to buyers I know outside this county. In exchange, I'd want a share in the ranch's future profits, nothing in the land itself. You'd keep the deed, you'd keep the name on the gate. Abby studied him for a long moment, searching his face for the catch she was certain had to be hiding somewhere. Why would you do that for someone you just met? Something flickered behind his eyes, there and gone so fast, she almost missed it. Let's just say I have my reasons, and they're good ones. I'll tell you the whole truth when the time is right. That's not an answer. No, he agreed. It isn't, but it's what I can give you today. She wanted to say no. Every practical bone in her body told her that trusting a stranger with secrets was the fastest way to lose everything Daniel had built. But she thought of the red circle on her bank statement, the 81 days that were now 79, and the quiet dignity in the way this man had spoken up for her when no one else in that barn had bothered to try. I'll think about it, she said. That's all I'm asking. He touched the brim of his hat, the same small gesture from the auction, and turned to walk his horse back down the road. Abby watched him go, and for the first time since Daniel's funeral, she let herself wonder if the universe was finally, quietly, trying to make something right. Word of the arrangement reached Sadie Coleman before Abby had a chance to tell her herself, which was, Abby supposed, simply how Caldwell County worked. Sadie showed up at the ranch 2 mornings later with a basket of muffins she had clearly baked as an excuse to ask questions, setting it on the porch rail with the careful precision of a woman preparing for battle. You didn't think to call me before you signed a business deal with a man nobody in this county can vouch for? Sadie asked, arms crossed. I haven't signed anything yet, Abby said, and I don't need anyone to vouch for him. I need someone to help me keep this ranch, and so far, he's the only one who's offered. I would have helped. You have 3 kids and a husband working double shifts at the mill, Sadie. You can't co-sign a loan with muffins. Abby softened her tone, seeing the hurt flash across her friend's face. I know you mean well. I do. But I have to make this decision with my head, not with what the town thinks is proper for a widow to do. Sadie was quiet for a moment, turning a muffin over in her hands without eating it. Just promise me you'll have your lawyer go over every line of that contract. Twice. I promise. It was a small concession, but it seemed to ease something in Sadie's shoulders, and by the time she left, the tension between them had softened into something closer to their old friendship. Worry and love tangled together, the way they so often were between women who had known each other since childhood. Abby did not sleep well that night. She lay awake staring at the ceiling of the bedroom she used to share with Daniel, running numbers in her head that never quite added up in her favor. By morning, she had made her decision, not because she trusted Colt Bennett completely, but because she trusted her own instincts. And her instincts told her that a man who defended a stranger's dignity in public was not the kind of man who set traps in private. She found him at the old Miller place, repairing a section of fence with the easy competence of someone who had done that work 1,000 times before. I'll take the partnership, she said, before she could talk herself out of it. But I want everything in writing. My lawyer reviews it before I sign anything. Wouldn't have it any other way, Colt said, setting down his fencing pliers. Smart is better than trusting, Mrs. Reyes. Smart keeps you standing when trust lets you down. You sound like you're speaking from experience. I am. He wiped his hands on his jeans. But that's a story for another day. Over the following 2 weeks, Colt kept his word in every way she could measure. The paperwork arrived exactly as promised, fair and clean, reviewed by her lawyer, and found to be, if anything, generous in her favor. The first loan payment cleared on time. New fencing went up along the north pasture. A buyer from 3 counties over came to look at her herd and left an order that would carry the ranch through the winter. But it was the small things that told Abby the most about Colt Bennett. The way he asked Levi's opinion before making decisions instead of simply issuing orders. The way he remembered that Bonnie, her second hand, was saving up to send her daughter to college, and quietly arranged extra hours whenever the work allowed it. The way he never once looked at Abby like she was something fragile that needed protecting, only like she was someone whose judgment he respected. "You work like someone who's done this before," she said to him one afternoon, watching him mend a gate with practiced hands. "I grew up on a ranch not far from here," he said. "Different life, different name on the mailbox. But the work doesn't change much from one place to the next. You keep saying things like that." "Half answers." Colt paused, setting down his tools, and for a moment she thought he might finally tell her the truth she could sense hiding underneath his careful words. Instead, he looked out toward the horizon, where the sun was beginning its slow slide toward the hills. "Your husband," he said quietly. "Daniel, what was he like?" The question caught her off guard, and something in his tone made the hair on her arms rise. Stubborn, kind. He believed this land could be more than what his father left him. She studied Colt's face. "How did you know his name?" "Small county," Colt said, too quickly. "People talk." It was not a lie exactly, but it was not the whole truth either, and Abby filed the moment away in the growing collection of things about Colt Bennett that did not quite add up. Still, whatever secret he was carrying, it had not stopped him from keeping every promise he had made her, and for now, that would have to be enough. 2 more weeks passed, in a rhythm Abby had almost forgotten was possible. Steady mornings, full ledgers, a herd growing healthier by the week under Colt's careful management. She found herself, more than once, watching him work from a distance, and wondering how a stranger had managed to fold himself so completely into the rhythm of a life she had built with someone else. One evening, after the chores were finished, she caught him standing at the edge of the north pasture, looking out at the land with an expression she could not quite place, something between longing and grief. She approached quietly, not wanting to startle him out of whatever memory held him there. "You look like a man who's seen this view before," she said. He did not turn immediately. "In a way, I have. Not this exact field, but land like it. A long time ago, before things got complicated." "You keep saying things got complicated, like it's a place you can point to on a map." "It is, in a manner of speaking." He finally looked at her, and there was something raw in his expression that made her chest ache without knowing why. "Give me a little more time, Abby. I'm not stalling to hurt you. I'm trying to find the right way to say something that could change everything between us." She wanted to demand the truth right then, but the vulnerability in his voice stopped her. Whatever he was carrying, it clearly cost him something to hold, and some instinct told her that pushing too hard, too fast, might close a door she was only beginning to understand was open at all. The first real test of the partnership came on a Wednesday, when a truck broke down hauling feed from the co-op and threatened to leave the herd short of grain before the weekend delivery. Levi and Colt worked side by side under the hood for the better part of an afternoon, trading tools and quiet observations about engines and weather, and the particular stubbornness of machines that had outlived their warranty by a decade. "You're handy," Levi said, wiping grease from his hands as the engine finally turned over. "Most men who talk as smoothly as you don't know one end of a wrench from the other." "I wasn't always in the business of talking smoothly," Colt said. "Spent plenty of years getting my hands dirty before I learned there was money in doing it for other people instead." "What business was that?" Colt's easy smile flickered, just for a moment. "Long story. One I owe Abby before I owe anybody else in this county." Levi studied him for a long moment, the kind of look that came from decades of reading men by their actions rather than their words, and whatever he saw seemed to satisfy something in him, because he simply nodded and went back to the engine without pressing further. It was, Abby would later think, one of the things she admired most about Levi, his willingness to let trust be earned in its own time, rather than demanded all at once. The town of Caldwell had never been kind to Abby, but after Colt Bennett moved into the old Miller place and started spending his afternoons at the Reyes ranch, the whispers took on a sharper edge. She felt the stares every time she walked into the feed store or the small grocery on Main Street, felt the conversation stop and start again, in a lower register the moment she passed. Her closest friend, Sadie Coleman, found her outside the feed store one Saturday morning, arms full of grocery bags and worry lines creasing her forehead. "You need to be careful with that man," Sadie said, without so much as a greeting first. "Good morning to you too. I'm serious, Abby. Nobody knows a thing about him. He shows up out of nowhere, throws money around like it means nothing to him, and suddenly he's running half your ranch's business. My staff," Sadie lowered her voice. "People are saying he might be connected to some land deal gone wrong 2 counties over. Big money, bad reputation. People say a lot of things about a widow who dares to keep her own ranch running," Abby said, more sharply than she intended. "Half this town decided I was helpless the day Daniel died. Now they've decided the one man who's actually helped me must be dangerous. Funny how that works." Sadie's expression softened. "I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to protect you. You've been through enough." "I know." Abby set her grocery bags down and pulled her friend into a brief hug. "And I love you for it. But I trust my own read on people, Sadie. Colt hasn't given me one reason to doubt him." "Not yet," Sadie said quietly. The words stayed with Abby long after Sadie drove away. She wanted to dismiss them as small-town gossip, the same kind of talk that had followed her since Daniel's funeral. But a small, cautious part of her could not fully silence the doubt. She thought of the way Colt had flinched, almost imperceptibly, when she mentioned Daniel's name. She thought of his half-answers, his careful evasions, the way he seemed to know more about her life than a stranger passing through should reasonably know. That evening, she found him at the barn, checking on Marigold's feed. She watched him for a moment before speaking, studying the quiet, careful way he moved among the animals, like a man who had spent a lifetime learning to be gentle with things easily broken. "People in town are asking questions about you," she said. "I imagine they are." He did not look up from his work. "Small towns don't like things they can't explain. Give me something to explain them with, then." He straightened, and for a long moment, he looked at her with an expression she could not fully read, something between guilt and longing. "Soon," he said. "I promise you, Abby. Soon. That's what you keep saying." "I know." His voice was quieter now, almost rough. "And I know that's not fair to you. But when I tell you the truth, I need you to understand that everything I've done since that auction, I did because I believed in you before you ever knew my name." The words settled over her like a held breath, heavy with meaning she could not yet grasp. She wanted to press him further, to demand the truth right then and there, but something in his eyes stopped her, some silent plea for a little more time. Against her better judgment, she gave it to him. The days that followed the cut fence brought a different kind of tension to the ranch, a low hum of unease that settled over every task, no matter how ordinary. Abby found herself checking the locks on the gates twice before bed, listening for sounds in the night that never used to keep her awake. Levi doubled the patrol schedule without being asked, and Bonnie began arriving before dawn, unwilling to leave Abby to face whatever came next without company. Colt, for his part, grew quieter, more watchful, the easy warmth she had begun to expect from him, replaced by a coiled alertness that reminded her, unsettlingly, of a man preparing for a fight he had fought before. She caught him once, near midnight, walking the fence line alone with a flashlight, and when she asked him what he was looking for, he only said, "Anything that shouldn't be there," before continuing on into the dark without further explanation. Across town that same week, in the back office of the Voss Feed and Supply Store, Harlan sat behind a desk, cluttered with county paperwork, nursing a glass of whiskey far earlier in the day than most men would consider proper. His nephew, Dale, leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, waiting for instructions. "The widow's got herself a partner," Harlan said, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "Some drifter with more money than sense, buying her cattle and mending her fences like he's auditioning for Husband of the Year. You want me to look into him? I want you to remind Mrs. Reyes that Caldwell County remembers who really runs things around here." Harlan set his glass down with a heavy thud. Start with the north pasture fence, nothing that can be traced back to us. Just enough to remind her that a stranger with deep pockets can't watch every inch of 400 acres. Dale hesitated. That's a lot of land to be sabotaging over one cow at an auction, Uncle Harlan. It was never about the cow. Harlan's eyes hardened, the easy charm he wore in public falling away to reveal something colder underneath. That ranch sits on the best water table in this county. Her husband knew it. I offered him a fair price for that land 3 times before he died, and 3 times that stubborn fool turned me down. I don't intend to let his widow finish what he started. Dale nodded slowly, understanding settling over his features, though something in his expression suggested he was not entirely comfortable with where this was heading. He left without further argument, and Harlan poured himself another glass, already turning his mind toward the next family in the county who had dared to hold on to land he believed, in his own twisted reasoning, belonged rightfully to men like him. The trouble began on a Tuesday, the way most disasters begin, quietly, and then all at once. Abby woke before dawn to the sound of the cattle bawling in distress, a frantic, panicked noise that pulled her out of bed and into her boots before she was fully awake. By the time she reached the north pasture, Levi and Bonnie were already there, working desperately to calm a herd that had broken through a fence line and scattered across 2 properties in the dark. Something spooked them bad. Levi shouted over the noise, wrestling with a gate latch. Fence didn't just fail, Abby. Somebody cut it. Her stomach dropped. Cut it. Clean lines. Wire cutters, not wear and tear. Levi's face was grim in the gray pre-dawn light. This wasn't an accident. They spent the next 4 hours rounding up scattered cattle, checking for injuries, and mending the damaged fence line well enough to hold until proper repairs could be made. 2 calves had broken legs in the chaos and had to be put down, a loss that hit Abby harder than the financial cost, because Daniel had named those calves himself, in the last spring before the ice storm took him. Colt arrived partway through the recovery, his face darkening as he surveyed the damage. He knelt beside the cut fence wire, running his thumb along the clean edge. "This is Harlan Voss's work," he said quietly. "You don't know that. I know men like him." Colt stood, brushing dust from his knees. He lost face at that auction, in front of half the county. Men like Harlan don't forgive that. They find quiet ways to make you pay for it. Abby wrapped her arms around herself, exhaustion and anger warring in her chest. "I can't prove any of this. If I go to the sheriff with nothing but a cut fence and a guess, Harlan will laugh me out of the office. He practically owns half the county council." "Then we get proof," Colt said. "Cameras on the fence lines. I'll cover the cost. You keep covering costs, Colt. At some point I'm going to owe you more than this ranch is worth." His expression softened, some of the hardness leaving his eyes. "You don't owe me anything, Abby. Not for this. Not for any of it. Everyone wants something," she said, more tired than bitter. "Even the good ones. Especially the good ones sometimes. Then let me prove I'm the exception." He held her gaze, steady and unflinching. "Give me the chance to show you." She did not answer right away, too worn down by grief and worry to trust her own judgment in that moment. But something in the quiet certainty of his voice reached past her exhaustion, and for the first time since the fence line had been cut, she allowed herself to breathe a little easier, if only because she was no longer facing the damage alone. By nightfall, the cameras were installed, the herd was accounted for, and the 2 of them stood together at the edge of the pasture, watching the sun disappear behind hills that had seen more than their share of trouble that season. Neither of them spoke of what had passed between them in the barnyard that morning, but the silence between them now felt different than it had before, less like distance, and more like the beginning of something neither of them was ready to name. Dr. Whitfield's preliminary findings arrived by phone the next afternoon, and though the full lab report would take several more days, her early assessment was enough to steal the breath from Abby's lungs. Whatever chemical had been introduced into the water supply had been engineered, not improvised. the kind of substance a person needed real money and real knowledge to acquire. Abby spent that evening walking the perimeter of her property alone, needing the solitude to process the weight of what was happening to her. She thought of Daniel, of the promises she had made at his graveside to keep this land standing no matter what it cost her, and she felt, for the first time since his death, a flicker of something closer to rage than grief. Someone had decided her survival was an inconvenience worth eliminating, and she found, walking those quiet fields under a sky full of more stars than she had noticed in months, that the anger steadied her in a way sorrow never had. 3 days after the fence was cut, 2 of Abby's cattle fell sick. Their coats grew dull, their appetite disappeared, and by the second morning, one of them could barely stand. Panic set in fast. A sick herd could mean the end of everything, faster than any unpaid loan ever could. The county veterinarian, an older woman named Dr. Whitfield, who had known Daniel since he was a boy, arrived within the hour and spent a long time examining the animals with a furrowed brow. "This isn't natural," Dr. Whitfield said finally, packing up her instruments. "The symptoms don't match any disease I've seen in this region. I'd want to test the water before I ruled anything out." Colt was already moving toward the well pump before she finished the sentence, and Abby followed close behind, her heart hammering with a dread she did not want to name out loud. They found it within the hour, a faint chemical residue coating the inside of the water trough nearest the north pasture, the same pasture where the fence had been cut days before. Dr. Whitfield collected a sample for testing, her expression grim. "If this comes back the way I think it will," she said, "somebody poisoned your water supply, Abby." And this isn't the kind of mistake that happens by accident. Abby stood frozen at the edge of the trough, staring at the faint film on the water's surface, feeling the ground shift beneath her in a way that had nothing to do with the physical earth. 2 lost calves and a cut fence could be dismissed as spite. Poisoned water was something else entirely. It was an attack, deliberate and calculated, aimed not at frightening her, but at destroying everything she had left. "Harlan," she said quietly. "I'd bet the deed to my own land on it," Colt said, his voice low and hard. Why would he go this far? A cut fence is one thing. This could kill my whole herd. It could kill me, if I hadn't caught it in time. Colt was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working like he was chewing on words he did not want to say out loud. "Because Harlan Voss doesn't just want to embarrass you, Abby. He wants your land. This ranch sits on the best water rights in the county, and if enough small ranchers go under from a mystery illness in their herds, Harlan and his council friends can buy up the land for pennies and control the water for the whole valley." "That's a big accusation without proof." "Then let's get proof," Colt said. "I know people. Lab contacts outside the county who won't answer to Harlan's friends on the board. We test everything properly, quietly, and we build a case he can't laugh his way out of." Abby looked at him for a long moment, weighing the calm certainty in his voice against the growing unease that had followed her since the day he first stepped out of the shadows at that auction. "You keep saying things like you already know how this town works from the inside, like you've fought this fight before." Something flickered across his face, quick and painful. "I have," he admitted quietly. "Just not for myself." "Colt, not tonight, Abby. Please." His voice was rougher than she had ever heard it. "Let me finish protecting what's left before I tell you why it matters so much to me." She wanted to push harder, but the exhaustion of the day, combined with the fear still coiled tight in her chest, left little room for anything but trust. She nodded, and together they gathered water samples in the fading light. 2 people bound now by more than a business arrangement, united instead by a shared enemy and a truth that was circling closer with every passing day. That night, unable to sleep, Abby sat on her porch, wrapped in one of Daniel's old work jackets, the sleeves too long for her arms, but the smell of him long since faded from the fabric. Colt found her there sometime after midnight, having noticed her light still burning from across the yard. "Can't sleep either?" he asked, settling onto the step below her without waiting for an invitation. Too much to think about. She pulled the jacket tighter around her shoulders. Poisoned water, a cut fence, a man in this county with enough money and meanness to try ruining a family he's never even had dinner with. It doesn't add up to anything a person should have to carry alone. You're not carrying it alone. I know. She looked down at him, moonlight softening the tired lines of his face. But you still haven't told me why you're carrying it with me. Not really. He was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the dark shape of the barn against the star-filled sky. There are things about my past I haven't earned the right to share yet. Not because I don't trust you, but because once I say them out loud, I can't take them back, and I need to be sure the timing is right, for your sake as much as mine. That sounds like the kind of secret that could change everything. It might, he admitted, but not in the way you're probably imagining. She wanted to press further, but something in his voice, tired and honest and careful all at once, told her that whatever truth he was protecting, it came from a place of real caution rather than deception. She let the silence stretch between them instead, comfortable despite its weight. Two tired people sharing a porch step under a sky too full of stars to feel entirely alone beneath it. The storm rolled in without warning, the way summer storms in Caldwell County always did, turning a clear evening sky into a churning wall of black clouds within the space of an hour. Abby and Colt were still out checking the fence lines when the first heavy drops began to fall, and by the time they reached the shelter of the old barn, they were both soaked through and breathless from the run. Lightning split the sky outside, illuminating the barn's interior in brief silver flashes. Abby wrung water from her sleeve, laughing despite herself at the absurdity of their situation, and when she looked up, she found Colt watching her with an expression that stole the laughter right out of her chest. "What?" she asked. "Nothing." He looked away first, running a hand through his damp hair. "It's just been a long time since I saw someone laugh like that, like the world hadn't beaten it out of them yet." "The world's tried pretty hard," she admitted, settling onto a bale of hay. "Most days I don't know how I'm still standing." "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for. Or stubborn." Daniel used to say those were the same thing, in my case. Saying his name out loud still ached, but less sharply than it once had, and she found herself studying Colt's reaction carefully, watching the same flicker of something unreadable cross his features every time her late husband came up in conversation. "Tell me about him," Colt said quietly. "Not the polite version. The real one." Abby was quiet for a long moment, watching rain streak down the gaps in the old barn wood. He was the kind of man who gave away his last dollar to someone who needed it more, even when we didn't have a dollar to spare. He believed people deserved a chance to prove themselves before you judged them. He used to say that about you, actually. Strangers, I mean. He'd pick up hitchhikers on Route 9, no matter how many times I told him it was dangerous. Colt's jaw tightened, something raw moving behind his eyes. Sounds like a good man. He was. She studied Colt's face in the dim light. You keep reacting like you knew him. Every time I bring him up, something changes in your face. The silence stretched long enough that she thought he might finally give her the answer she had been chasing for weeks. Instead, he reached out, slow and careful, and brushed a strand of wet hair away from her face, his fingers lingering for a moment against her cheek. "Abby," he said, his voice low and rough, "there's so much I want to tell you. About Daniel, about why I came to this county, about why that auction wasn't the first time I ever heard your name." He paused, his thumb tracing gently along her jaw. "But right now, at this moment, all I want is to know if you'll let me be honest about something else first." Her heart pounded against her ribs, equal parts fear and want. "What's that?" "That I have not been able to stop thinking about you since the moment you looked at me across that auction barn, and I am done pretending that this is only about business." The rain hammered against the roof, and the distance between them closed slowly, carefully, like two people who both understood how much was at stake in the space between hesitation and certainty. When their lips met, it was gentle at first, a question more than an answer, and when she did not pull away, it deepened into something neither of them tried to name out loud. His hands found her waist, careful and reverent, and hers curled into the damp fabric of his jacket, holding on the way she had not let herself hold on to anything in 140 days. When they finally broke apart, foreheads resting together, breathless in the storm-lit dark, Colt spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "There's a truth I owe you," he said. "A big one, and I promise you'll have it soon. But I needed you to know how I feel first, before anything else about me changes what you think of me." Abby searched his eyes, finding nothing but sincerity there, and for the first time in months, she let herself lean fully into someone else's strength, instead of carrying every burden alone. "Whatever it is," she said softly, "I trust that you'll tell me when you're ready. Just don't make me wait too long, Colt Bennett. I've buried enough secrets with a man I loved. I don't intend to bury another one." The morning after the storm, Abby woke to sunlight streaming through her window and a strange, unfamiliar lightness in her chest, the kind that came from allowing herself, finally, to want something for herself again. She found Colt in the kitchen, already brewing coffee, with the easy familiarity of a man who had quietly become part of the rhythm of her house, not just her ranch. "About last night," she started. "I meant every word," he said simply, setting a mug in front of her. "I'm not a man who says things he doesn't mean, Abby. Whatever comes next, whatever truth I still owe you, that part isn't in question." She smiled, despite the uncertainty still coiled beneath her ribs, and let herself, for one quiet morning, simply enjoy the warmth of a kitchen that no longer felt so empty. In the days leading up to the storm, something had been quietly shifting between them that neither had yet found the words to name. Small moments, his hand steadying hers on a startled horse, her laughter at a joke he had not meant to be funny, the way they had both, without discussing it, began sharing coffee on the porch most mornings before the work began. Abby found herself looking forward to those mornings more than she was willing to admit, even to herself, and she noticed the way Colt's eyes softened whenever she was the one who broke the comfortable silence between them first. Bonnie had noticed too, teasing Abby gently one afternoon while they worked side by side mending halters in the tack room. "You smile differently around him," she said, not looking up from her work. "Softer, like you forgot to guard it." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you don't." Bonnie's grin was knowing but kind. "Daniel would want you happy, Abby. Grief doesn't have an expiration date, but it's not supposed to be a life sentence either." Abby had not answered right away, turning the words over in her mind, long after Bonnie had gone home for the evening. She thought about the version of herself who had stood in that auction barn 5 months ago, invisible and humiliated, and she wondered if that woman would recognize the one standing in the tack room now, cautiously, quietly, allowing herself to hope for something more than survival. The water sample results came back on a Thursday afternoon, delivered by courier from the independent lab 3 counties over. Abby read the report twice before the meaning fully settled into her bones. A controlled chemical agent, not naturally occurring, consistent with a substance used to weaken livestock without immediately killing them, present in concentrations too precise to be accidental contamination. Someone had deliberately poisoned her water supply. Dr. Whitfield's earlier samples from 2 other small ranches in the county, quietly obtained through Colt's contacts, showed the same chemical signature. Abby was not the only target. She was simply the first to catch it in time. The county council meeting that Thursday evening was packed tighter than Abby had ever seen it, word having spread that something significant was about to happen. Harlan Voss sat at the head table in his usual seat, flanked by 2 other council members who owed their positions, in one way or another, to his influence. Abby stood when public comment opened, her hands steady despite the roar of her pulse in her ears. Colt sat in the front row, close enough to reach if her voice failed her, though she was determined not to let it. "I have proof that someone deliberately contaminated the water supply on my ranch," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the packed room. The same contamination has been found on 2 other small ranches in this county. I believe this was done deliberately, to force small ranchers into selling their land. A murmur swept through the crowd. Harlan Voss leaned back in his chair, an expression of practiced boredom settling over his features. "That's a serious accusation, Mrs. Reyes," he said smoothly. "Do you have any actual evidence connecting this unfortunate incident to anyone in particular? Or is this simply another example of a grieving widow struggling under the pressure of responsibilities she was never equipped to handle?" The insult landed exactly as he intended it to, drawing uncomfortable laughter from a few corners of the room. Abby felt heat rise in her chest, but she held her ground, refusing to let him see it shake her. "I have lab results from an independent facility," she said. "I have documentation of a cut fence line on the same night the contamination likely began. And I have a growing list of ranchers in this county willing to speak up, now that they know they aren't the only ones this happened to." "Rumors and coincidences," Harlan said dismissively. "This council has more important business than entertaining conspiracy theories from a woman who can't keep her own fence lines secure." Colt rose from his seat then, his presence immediately commanding the room's attention. "Careful, Harlan. Slander is a serious accusation too, and I promise you, we can prove exactly where that water contamination came from." Harlan's eyes narrowed as they landed on Colt, a flicker of genuine unease crossing his face for the first time that evening. "And who exactly are you to make threats in a public meeting, Mr. Bennett? Some drifter who showed up out of nowhere and started throwing money around a struggling widow's ranch. Someone who knows this county better than you'd like to believe," Colt said evenly, "and someone who isn't finished yet." The council chairman called for order, cutting the exchange short before it could escalate further, but the damage to Harlan's composure had already been done. As the meeting adjourned, Harlan approached Abby and Colt near the exit, his voice dropping to a low, threatening register that only they could hear. "You've made a mistake, the both of you," he said quietly. "By morning, my lawyers will have paperwork proving that the ranch never legally belonged to your husband in the first place, Mrs. Reyes. Land grant filed before Daniel's father ever set foot on that property. I'll take that land whether you cooperate or not, and there won't be a single thing your mystery man here can do about it." He walked away before either of them could respond, leaving Abby standing frozen in the parking lot. The fragile hope she had been building over the past several weeks, suddenly threatening to collapse beneath the weight of a threat she had never seen coming. Word of Harlan's threat spread through the county almost as quickly as word of the auction had months before, and by the following morning, 3 other ranching families had quietly reached out to Abby, sharing stories of unexplained losses they had been too afraid to report on their own. A sick calf here, a poisoned trough there, always dismissed by the county council as bad luck or poor management. Hearing their stories, Abby realized the scope of what Harlan had built was larger and older than she had ever imagined. A quiet campaign of ruin, stretching back years before her own trouble had even begun. "This isn't just about my land anymore," she told Colt that night, spreading the newly gathered testimonies across her kitchen table alongside the land grant and the invoice. "This is about every family in this county he's been quietly destroying." "Then we make sure the hearing exposes all of it," Colt said. "Not just your case. All of it." Abby did not sleep that night. She sat at her kitchen table, with every document she owned spread out before her, land deeds and loan papers, and the folded, yellowing land grant that Daniel's father had passed down to him, years before she had ever met either of them. If Harlan truly had forged paperwork claiming otherwise, she needed proof that her family's ownership was the real one, and she needed it before he could file anything with the county recorder. Colt arrived before sunrise, Levi and Bonnie close behind him, all 3 of them ready to work. Abby had never been more grateful for the people who had chosen to stand beside her when the rest of the county had chosen to look away. "Harlan's bluffing about part of this," Colt said, spreading a set of old county records across the table. "I did some digging last night. Land grant law in this state requires the original filing to be registered with the state archive, not just the county office. If Daniel's father filed correctly, and I believe he did, there should be a matching record at the state level that Harlan can't touch or forge.
How do you know that?
Abby asked. Colt hesitated, the same familiar flicker crossing his face. Because I've spent the last several years learning everything I can about land law in this state. It's part of the truth I still owe you, Abby. I promise, after this is settled, you'll have all of it. She wanted to press him, but there was no time. Bonnie had already located a digitized copy of the state archive database, and within an hour, they found it. The original 1974 land grant, registered under Daniel's father's name, matching every detail on the paper deed Abby had kept safe in her firebox for years. Harlan's claim, whatever forged document he intended to present, would not hold up against a properly filed state record. But land ownership was only half the battle. The poisoned water and the sabotaged fence line were crimes, not just civil disputes. And proving Harlan's direct involvement would require more than documentation. It would require a confession, or something close enough to one. There's a shipment of the same chemical agent found in your water supply, Colt said, laying out a printed invoice he had obtained through a contact at the regional agricultural supply company. Purchased 6 weeks ago, delivered to a storage unit registered under a shell company. I traced the shell company back to Harlan's brother-in-law. That's not enough to prove Harlan ordered it, Levi pointed out. No, Colt agreed. But it's enough to get a warrant for the storage unit, and if there's residue matching the contamination in your water trough, that's enough to bring in the state agricultural fraud division. Once that happens, Harlan's forged land grant becomes the least of his problems. Abby looked around her kitchen table at the small group of people who had chosen, without hesitation, to fight beside her. Levi, who had stayed loyal through 11 years of hard seasons. Bonnie, who worked twice as hard as anyone twice her size to make sure her daughter had a future. And Colt, a man whose full truth she still did not know, but whose actions had spoken louder than any explanation ever could. Then let's finish this, she said. Tomorrow, at the property hearing, we bring everything, the land grant, the invoice, all of it, in front of the whole county if we have to. Tomorrow, Colt agreed, meeting her eyes with a steady, unwavering resolve. And Abby, whatever happens after that, whatever truth I owe you, finally comes out into the light, I need you to know that everything I've done, from that auction to this table, has been because I believe you deserve to keep what's yours. She reached across the table and took his hand, feeling the calluses of hard work against her palm, and for the first time since Daniel's death, she felt something steady beneath her feet again. Not certainty, not yet, but the solid, unshakable ground of people who refused to let her fall alone. While Bonnie searched the state archive database, Abby drove into town alone to speak with Dr. Whitfield about the final lab report, needing to hear the confirmation in person rather than over the phone. The veterinarian's office smelled of antiseptic and old coffee, and Dr. Whitfield greeted her with the same steady calm she had shown at the ranch days before. The chemical signature is a match across all 3 properties, Dr. Whitfield confirmed, sliding the report across her desk. And I've already spoken with the 2 other families. They're willing to testify, Abby. They were just waiting for someone brave enough to go first. I didn't feel very brave standing in that council meeting. Bravery rarely feels the way people expect it to, Dr. Whitfield said. It usually just feels like doing the frightening thing anyway. Abby carried those words back to the ranch with her, turning them over like a stone worn smooth by handling. She thought of Daniel, of the quiet, stubborn courage he had shown every season he refused to sell to Harlan Voss, and she understood, perhaps for the first time, that she had been carrying that same courage all along, even in the moments she felt most breakable. The property hearing was held in the same barn where the auction had taken place months before, the county having decided that a public matter of this size deserved a public venue. Every seat was filled. Farmers and ranchers from across the county had come, some out of curiosity, Others because they had quietly begun to suspect their own troubles were connected to the same rot at the center of Caldwell County's leadership. Harlan Voss arrived with a lawyer and a thick folder of documents, his confidence as polished as ever, though Abby noticed the faint tightness around his eyes that suggested even he understood how much was riding on this hearing. The county records clearly show, Harlan's lawyer began, addressing the presiding judge who had been brought in from the district court for the matter, that the original land grant for the Reyes property contains irregularities dating back to its original filing, which our client believes render the current deed legally void. He presented a document that looked, at a glance, official enough to convince anyone unfamiliar with the true history of the land. Abby felt her pulse quicken, but she kept her composure, waiting for her turn. When it came, Colt stood beside her at the small table reserved for their side of the hearing, and together they presented the state archive record, the original 1974 filing, matched line for line against the copy Abby had kept safe for years. The judge examined both documents carefully, comparing seals, signatures, and filing numbers with the meticulous attention of someone who had seen forged paperwork before and knew exactly what to look for. This state filing predates the document presented by Mr. Voss's counsel by several years, the judge said finally, setting both papers down. And the document submitted on behalf of Mr. Voss does not match state archive records at all. I have serious concerns about its authenticity. A ripple of murmurs swept through the crowd. Harlan's composure finally cracked, a flush of anger creeping up his neck as he leaned toward his lawyer, whispering urgently. Colt was not finished. He presented the invoice next, the paper trail connecting the chemical agent found in Abby's water supply to a shell company registered under Harlan's brother-in-law, and a search warrant executed that very morning, which had recovered a matching chemical residue inside the storage unit named in the shipping records. "This isn't a coincidence," Colt said, addressing the room now rather than just the judge. Mr. Voss orchestrated a deliberate campaign to poison livestock across multiple small ranches in this county, all while sabotaging fences and forging land documents in an effort to force families off land that sits above the most valuable water rights in the region. Mrs. Reyes was not his only target. She was simply the first one to fight back. During the recess called by the judge to review the archive documents, Abby stepped outside the barn for air, her hands trembling now that the adrenaline of speaking had begun to fade. Sadie found her there, pulling her into a fierce hug, without a word of apology for her earlier doubts. "I should have trusted your judgment from the start," Sadie said. "About Colt, about all of it. You were scared for me. I understand that better than anyone." Abby squeezed her friend's hand. "But I need you to know, whatever happens in there today, I'm not the same woman who stood in this barn 5 months ago and let a room full of people decide what I was worth." "No?" Sadie agreed, studying her with something like pride. "You're really not?" Inside, the hearing resumed, and one by one, the other affected ranching families rose to add their testimonies to Abby's, describing sick cattle and cut fences and unexplained losses that, alone, had seemed like nothing more than bad luck, but together painted a clear and damning picture of deliberate, coordinated sabotage. The judge listened to each account with growing gravity, and by the time the final testimony concluded, the mood in the barn had shifted entirely, sympathy and outrage replacing the skepticism that had greeted Abby when the hearing first began. The barn erupted into noise. Ranchers who had quietly suffered similar unexplained losses over the past year suddenly finding their voices at once, some shouting questions, others simply staring at Harlan with dawning, furious understanding. The judge called for order, but the truth had already broken loose in the room, unstoppable now that it had finally found the light. Harlan Voss was escorted from the barn less than an hour later, his lawyer already distancing himself from a client facing fraud, sabotage, and potential criminal charges from the State Agricultural Fraud Division. The county council, shamed and exposed, moved swiftly to strip him of his position before the week was out. Abby stood outside the barn afterward, the late afternoon sun warm against her face, watching the last of the crowd disperse into a county that finally understood the truth. Colt found her there, quiet and steady as always, though something in his posture told her the final truth he had promised her was finally ready to be spoken. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to let me finish before you say anything." She nodded, bracing herself. "Daniel and I served together, years before you ever met him," Colt said. "Before the ranch, before Caldwell County. We were young and stupid, and he pulled me out of a situation that should have killed me. I owed him a debt I never got the chance to repay, because by the time I tracked down where he'd settled, he was already gone, and you were left carrying everything alone." His voice roughened. "I came to that auction because I promised myself, years ago, that if anything ever happened to him, I would make sure his family never faced trouble without someone in their corner. That's the truth I owed you, Abby. Every step of this, it started as a debt to a man I respected. But somewhere along the way, it became something I wanted for myself, because of who you are, not just who you were married to." Abby's eyes filled with tears she did not try to hide. "You could have told me from the start. I know. I was afraid you'd see me as an obligation instead of a choice. And I needed you to know I was choosing you, every single day, before you knew why I first showed up." She closed the distance between them, resting her palm against his chest, feeling the steady beat of a heart that had carried more loyalty and quiet honor than she had ever fully understood until this moment. "Daniel would have liked knowing his debt turned into this," she said softly. "He always did believe good things came back around, eventually, to people who deserved them." Colt pulled her close, and for the first time since the ice storm that had taken everything from her, Abby let herself believe that the future in front of her held more promise than pain. The Reyes Ranch looked different by the following spring, though the changes were not the kind a stranger driving past on Route 9 would notice at first glance. The fences were mended and strong. The herd had doubled, thanks to new buyers who no longer worried about doing business with a woman running her own land. And the sign at the front gate, hand-painted by Levi as a surprise, now read Reyes and Bennett Ranch, a small change that carried a much larger meaning underneath it. Harlan Voss faced formal charges for fraud, sabotage, and agricultural tampering, and the county council he had once controlled through fear and favors was rebuilt from the ground up by ranchers who had learned, the hard way, the cost of staying silent while a bully reshaped their community to serve himself. Dr. Whitfield's testimony, along with the testimony of 2 other affected ranching families, ensured that Harlan's schemes would not simply fade quietly into county gossip and be forgotten. Abby often thought, in the quiet hours after evening chores, about everything the past year had taught her. She had learned that grief does not disqualify a person from strength, that the two can live side by side in the same heart without canceling each other out. She had learned that asking for help was not a weakness Daniel would have been ashamed of, but a wisdom he likely would have encouraged had he been given the chance. And she had learned that the people who truly matter in a hard season of life are rarely the loudest voices in the room. They are the quiet ones who show up before you ask them to and stay long after the crisis has passed. To anyone watching this story and facing their own auction barn moment, their own room full of people who have already decided what they think you are capable of, Abby's story offers a simple truth. Judgment from others says far more about their fear than it does about your worth. Keep your chin up, keep your hands steady, even when they shake, and trust that somewhere, whether in a stranger stepping out of the shadows or in the quiet strength you did not know you had, help is often closer than it appears. Sadie's family, along with the 2 other ranching households who had come forward, received a formal apology from the rebuilt county council within the month, along with a commitment to fund proper water testing across the county twice a year, a policy Abby herself helped draft after being asked to join the new Agricultural Oversight Board. It was not a position she had ever imagined wanting, but she found, Once she sat in that first meeting, that she was good at it, steady and clear-eyed, in a way that came from having survived exactly the kind of harm the board now existed to prevent. Levi retired from the day-to-day labor 2 years later, though he never fully left the ranch, spending his afternoons teaching a new generation of hired hands the same patient lessons he had once taught Daniel. Bonnie's daughter started college that same fall, her tuition covered in part by a scholarship fund Colt quietly established for children of Caldwell County ranching families, never once asking for public credit. As for Abby and Colt, their wedding took place the following spring, in the same north pasture where the fence had once been cut in the dark, now mended and strong and blooming with wild flowers that had taken root on their own, unplanted, the way good things sometimes do when a place is finally allowed to heal. Daniel's name was spoken that day, not as a shadow hanging over the celebration, but as a blessing, a man whose loyalty had reached forward through the years to protect the woman he loved, even after he was gone. Colt Bennett kept his promise to Daniel, and in doing so, found a life he had never expected to build. Abby kept her land, her dignity, and her late husband's legacy intact, and found, alongside all of it, a love she had never thought she would be brave enough to welcome again. Together, they built something neither grief nor greed could take from them. Subscribe to see how their story continues to unfold, and comment below to let us know where you're watching from. I would love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story has traveled, and how many hearts it has managed to reach along the way.